Hello, Hamish here from monline.co.nz. I'm talking about house prices, rents, and I've got Miriam Bell with me, reporter from The Post, senior business reporter.
Oh, that's right. Hi, Hamish. How are you?
Good, good. So things are in a bit of a flux at the moment, I think. If we look at the REINZ data, if you can call a dying market with dying rents a flux situation.
I think dying's a bit harsh. I mean, in terms of house prices, they certainly haven't been rising at a high rate over recent months or for quite some time. There has been a decline from, even the mini peak that we saw sort of at the end of 2023. But I'm told, and data indicates they're sort of flatlining more than declining now. And so that could be the bottom of the market again, a turn for the better, perhaps.
Yeah, if we look at the month on month, it definitely looked like Auckland had a bit of life in it. 3.8% median change, apparently upwards. I think that's March compared to Feb.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you look at the monthly figures, they're more promising, I suppose, than the annual comparison in that sense, because they're still down considerably, from last year. But I have heard from people that there's a lot more interest in the market. There's a lot more people going through open homes and attending auctions.
Yeah.
It does seem to be more activity.
I think it's natural
happening
with lowering interest rates, right? We saw that
absolutely.
And
also,
COVID, I think we must have done a clip back then at some point where we were.
We did, yeah. I think the lower interest rates are key. I mean, obviously, there's also a bit of economic uncertainty in the market more broadly at the moment due to sort of global issues. And I understand that some first home buyers may be seeing their KiwiSaver deposits affected that way.
That's a scary thing, right?
Yeah.
If you got KiwiSaver before you settle, you should really talk to an investment advisor before you start looking at houses.
Absolutely, because I understand that some funds have been affected, enough to make a difference. Yeah. So that is an issue. But previously, first home buyers were a strong component of the market. And
I think investors are picking up, apparently.
I've heard differing views on that. I gather that there's, again, more interest and inquiry from investors. But there's not a huge evidence of them returning to the market en masse at the moment.
They're borrowing a little bit more.
Interesting.
But I think if we look at Auckland, if we look at a little bit deeper in Auckland, it looks like Manukau, which is a very investor area, would you say? It looks like it's got a little bit of life. A lot more in Auckland Central. But
I mean, again, it's an area that's quite investor heavy in Auckland Central. I mean, particularly in the very central city area, there's obviously a lot of apartments which are investor heavy. I think there's also quite a bit of new stock coming onto the market in Auckland and potentially in those areas I think that impacts on things.
Which is interesting because you'd have to be a brave investor. Obviously, it feels like we're in the bottom of the market for prices, but in terms of rents, when you've got articles like these beautiful articles from Stuff and The Post around rents diminishing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in TradeMe's latest rental data, they indicate that the number of listings they have on their site, rental listings, are at a sort of 10-year high, which is quite considerable. It indicates that there is more stock on the market in terms of rental properties, and that, of course, does make things more difficult for landlords trying to rent their properties out because renters have choice, which they may not have. I understand from property managers that they are talking to people sometimes about their rent expectations and that listings are still lingering on the market longer than they had done previously. So that's a consideration for investors, I think.
I think you're right. Interestingly, you actually had some info from Barfoot and Thompson. It looks like compared to last year, it definitely some areas are still maybe under different levels of pressure, right, in terms of rents.
I think
South Auckland there showing South Auckland and Franklin showing like a lot more pressure, and North Shore than other parts of Auckland in terms of rents. Maybe they're holding up better there. Maybe
potentially. I mean, the Barfoot and Thompson data is done differently, obviously, to TradeMe's, which is based around properties being advertised for rent, whereas Barfoot and Thompson's data is across the stock that they manage. And there's their data indicates that, rents are still going up, just not as fast. Again, that's a bit of relief for renters, which not a bad thing. But it does mean that landlords may need to adjust some of the expectations they had in previous years. It's just not as easy out there as it was.
And I think with the tax rules changing, the burden on the cost side is lessened as well for investors.
Theoretically, yeah.
So it should, and of course interest rates is a big one. So,
yeah. I mean, I guess balancing that out, you have sort of things like rates, which are, of course, going up, and various other issues in terms of costs, which bear on people a bit. But you would expect that with interest deductibility returning, it might make a difference as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Council rates are really, really outstrip inflation, don't they, really?
Well, particularly in some areas. I mean, obviously, it's where I gather Wellington and Christchurch have had pretty high rate rises, whereas Auckland's has been a bit less than theirs comparatively, So,
years, maybe.
I mean, compared to, they are less than other parts of, not all parts, but other parts of New Zealand. Nonetheless, it doesn't alleviate that burden particularly. It's something that people need to consider if they're wanting to have a rental property.
So I think overall it's an interesting market. Do you think there's a lot of migration to Australia that's having an effect? Obviously, new builds coming on the market.
The migration rates you would think would have to come into it. I have heard that there might be people migrating to Australia and elsewhere who own houses and don't want to sell them at this point. Whether that indicates they're coming back or not, who knows? But and therefore they're renting them. That means more rental properties coming onto the market again. So that you would think that there would be incoming migrants who
because we do have a positive gain, don't we?
So,
but maybe they live in different types of property. So
it's possible, and it depends where they're going to. So
the town, yeah, that's true.
Because stocks are quite, there's quite a bit of variety between different areas in terms of both rental stock and
Auckland's probably feeling it more, which would make sense in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, although I did do a story earlier which suggested that Wellington and Christchurch are also feeling it. I heard that Wellington's student market, for example, this year it was a lot harder to rent in, which is unusual, and it could be that students are moving into one property than in the past, possibly.
Well, students, more per property, right? So any kind of silver lining you see out there, any kind of opportunities if you're buying?
Well, I think it probably is a buyer's market still. Prices, haven't been rising at a rate that makes it difficult for anybody. As we discussed, they've been flatlining more than anything. So that sort of gives a bit of certainty, I guess, to people on what the price expectations for the house they're interested in might be. There's also a lot of stock on the market. I mean, you just need to drive around and see all the for sale signs, but that gives buyers choice. It does give them more negotiating power in a transaction. So that's something that is a silver line for buyers, at least. Perhaps something not so much for selling.
Unless you're trading up. A flat market is great for trading up because you kind of know where you stand on both sides, and you've got a bit more time to check things out.
Yeah, so I mean, in that sense, it's a market that, although much of the news we get around economic segments and factions within the country is a bit grim. It's not the bubbly market we saw a few years ago, but I think if you talk to most people, they would say that's not a bad thing because there is more certainty about what's going to happen, and given some of the affordability pressures we've had for a long time in New Zealand, while house prices are still not affordable, they're possibly more manageable than they were.
Yeah, and I think rents easing a bit is obviously a good thing as well for many New Zealanders, and I think
so.
For many years we've just had only increases, which were kind of killer, especially in the last 5 years, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, given we want to increase the amount of housing stock across both, the for sale and the for rent market, having more listings in both spaces, again, not a bad thing. I mean, it does help ease some of those pressures to a point, and that's the way you deal with a shortage, ultimately.
Well, thank you, Miriam. That's been good.
Thank you, Hamish.
Thanks for watching.